All right, so I'm going to call this meeting to order at 9:03 a.m. on February 25th. Um, First item of business is to adopt the agenda. Any comments before we adopt the agenda? All right, do I have do I have a motion? Gotta drink more coffee. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
I'll second
Second.
it.
Thank you, Lisa. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's passed unanimously. All right. Any members of the public present who wish to make a comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to the third item, which is to discuss legislative issues for potential board action. So thanks everybody for taking the time out for this quick board meeting. Just as a reminder, the reason we're doing this is we know that there's a lot of legislation going on, discussions about healthcare in general, about education and financing. And so what we're looking at is there any action that the board wants to take at this point in the legislative session? Is there any specific bills or other things that we want to weigh in on? I do want to preface this discussion with two things. First is Lance and I had a meeting. The commissioners of the negotiating commission, or the leaders of the negotiation commission, who came on in our last meeting. Lance and I met with them, just the four of us, and one of the things that they said struck me, which is in effect, we look to you guys to provide the unbiased information. Like we look for you guys to provide us the truth about costs and plans and that kind of thing. And we don't look at VEHI as a political board and as a political organization. So I was chewing on that. What I did is I went through our documents and our policies. So I think it's good for us to. Thanks, Andrew, for joining. I think it's good for us to just review quickly those and then have a discussion about VEHI's role in overall the political landscape. And then we're going to move on to specific things that I think that we can look at for this session. So the first thing I wanted to share, get this out of the way, was I started with the board protocol on legislative positions. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So as a reminder, what this is that anybody, essentially it says anybody can make a motion and bring it forward and say, hey, we think that we should take a position. And this is mostly about the process by which we're going to do that. So in effect, what we're doing today, we're going to have a discussion, and if we do, we can ask the management team to act on it in a way, and they can advise us, right? So the management team will determine what action is appropriate, but they can come back to us as well. The other relevant protocol for the board I found was a communication protocol, which essentially says the chair and the vice chair are going to be the ones to speak on behalf of the board. So I think if there's anything that we decide today that we really want to go to the legislature about and the board speaking to it, it would be Lance and myself. We all know, I think, that Bobby Joe and Mark have given testimony over the years, and that's a regular thing they do. But Bobby Joe and Mark, when you do that, you're providing information as a primary function, right?
As a rule, yes. We did endorse the Prescription Drug Affordability Board legislation last year, but Bobby Joe and I didn't testify to that. We just provided a letter on behalf of VEHI with the board's blessing. But most of the time, you're correct, we're providing information.
Okay, thank you. So any questions on these two board protocols or any comments? Yeah, Jonathan.
I mean, I think it's great to have a protocol, but in reality, the timing, it takes so long to do these things, like bring it to us, bring it back to you, talk about it. Things move quickly in the legislature. So while I understand it's nice to have it, in practicality, it makes it a little tough.
And to, follow up on that, a part of that reason is because we're given a very short time frame, like, hey, can you come tomorrow? So that's part of the issue as well.
But like under number 4, if they say, can you come tomorrow, and they want us to just provide information about, how VEHI comes about designing plans, or what, the rates are or something, that's fine. We can do that.
Okay.
That's actually how I've sort of understood the intent of this protocol. That is, I think the board has been comfortable with us within our trust administrator capacities, speaking to VEHI operations, to John's point. When it comes to specific pieces of legislation, that's where board management team interaction is fundamental, and the board needs to give its blessing for an endorsement, as it did with PDAB last year. But also, to Bobby Joe and John's point, things are moving really quickly. So this meeting is actually really propitious.
Okay. Any other comments? All right. Thank you, guys. The other thing that I did is I went back to look at our mission, because I remember we were talking at some point in the last 2.5 years about that. We were trying, part of the work was to reduce costs for our members and our taxpayers. And I was trying to find that. So I went through and I looked at our mission and our bylaws. So one of the things that's interesting is this mission is actually, it's old. It's 10 years old. Hasn't been changed. So to me, it's still our mission. I did not find verbiage around driving down the cost of healthcare in our mission. And you could see it's benefit plans, designing wellness program, and education. Those are our big 3 components. It does say that we want to, where is it? Oh, here, provide factual and vetted information. Now it says that 2 parties engaged in collective bargaining, right? This is pre-committee or commission, but I think that's still, that certainly struck me. The other place I looked is in the bylaws, and the bylaws did not state that part of our goal or mission is to drive down the cost of healthcare, or nowhere was I able to find that. So I want to open the floor up for discussion. Oh, Mark, do you know where that?
Hold on just for a sec, Mike. My computer's behaving badly. Okay. In the mission statement, there's a reference to the benefit plans being cost effective and affordable. So I've always sort of interpreted that language broadly to mean that, to whatever extent possible, we're going to keep rates low. And if we can lower them, in addition to bending the proverbial cost trend on rates, we should aspire to that as well. So that's how I've always interpreted, if cost effective and affordable. Where there's an opportunity to reduce costs, we will certainly do so. Again, within that language.
Mark, do you remember somewhere in some document that there was finding savings, some reference to driving down the cost somewhere in VEHI's? Does that sound familiar to you?
In terms of our formal documents like bylaws and mission statement, nothing comes to mind immediately. We did, the management team, and this is when Laura was still employed, we did produce a long document in 2019 that laid out a series of potential reform initiatives that could potentially lower costs, as well as constrain inflationary growth. But I don't recall anything in the bylaws that spoke explicitly to lowering costs as being part of the mission.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to open the floor and have a discussion because I was, we set up this meeting and I was looking at the legislation and blah, blah, blah. And then after talking to the leaders of the commission, I was really chewing on that. And one of my thoughts was the board is composed of people who are nominated by two political organizations, right? So the VTNEA and VSBA are inherently political organizations that do a ton of lobbying. And the commissioner saying, hey, we view VEHI as the truth tellers, right? A source of information, really just kept rattling around in my head. So my question to the board is, do we need, just because we can take a position, should we? Yeah, go ahead, Suzanne.
Well, I've been thinking about that a lot, actually, because I anticipated we'd have that discussion. What is the role of our organization? And whatever the role has been, or whatever the documents say, I think we have two reasons why we should be politically active at this point. First of all, I think we're looking at the life of our organization, whether or not we continue, whether or not health care for school employees works anymore at all. So I really feel that that's an important mission of us right now. Is if you look at some of the other languages to say, okay, so how can we stay afloat? What can we do to be a viable organization to serve the members and the taxpayers? And then you've already alluded to this, Mike. There is the political winds are bearing down on us right now, and we are being discussed, not necessarily as VEHI, but they talk about it as the teacher's health insurance. So I think we have to have a seat at the table, because if we don't, the old proverb, if you're not at the table, you're going to be on the table as part of the menu. So that's my reaction to that.
Thank you.
I'd have to agree with Suzanne. The bottom line is that as apolitical as we may try to be, even the commission is made up of two separate entities, and they're doing the job of negotiating. And if we can come to some sort of an agreement about what would be, cost effective and affordable, as well as preserving high, then it's win-win for everybody.
Commissioners see themselves as political or not political? Do you know what they see themselves as in terms of when you were speaking with them?
I don't know that I can answer that. Lance, did you get a sense of, they had some asks of us that weren't, it was stuff that we had talked about anyway, like looking at the programs, what are the levers that we can pull? So that was essentially their asks of us. But we didn't really get into what they're doing. I mean, they talked a little bit about the politics of the commission and why they just are rolling over the agreement, but not their role in the larger political discussion happening this session.
Last year, the commission sent a letter to the Green Mountain Care Board urging them to take a strong stand on hospital budgets and to keep them within the Green Mountain Care Board's budgetary guidance, which was an increase of no more than 3.4%. And they spoke pretty candidly about the impact of rising healthcare on school budgets and school services. So what we've seen after the first two rounds of statewide bargaining is the commission now trying to work together in the policy arena, first with the Green Mountain Care Board, and then later, and Bobby Joe and I testified to this committee as well, the legislative committee looking at the future of public education Bobby Joe and I testified at that board, again, just to inform them about VEHI and our programs and plans. But Mike Campbell and Mark Koenig both testified to that commission to speak to their collaborative efforts to try to get a handle on the root causes of rising prices. And recently they testified before the House Health Committee right after, or maybe right before Bobby Joe and I did. So for the first time in the commission's life, they have entered the policy arena and they are trying to make an impact on the direction of healthcare reform.
Thanks, Mark. Jonathan?
Sure, thanks. So I think other than the broader spectrum of providing information about rates and how VEHI works and those kinds of things, that's something that the management team needs to be doing. As far as lobbying on a position, the only one I can think of recently that's come up would be, and it wouldn't even be Mark and Bobby Joe and me, it would probably be the VEHI board members or the respective organizations would be talking about eliminating VEHI and having the state of Vermont handle all teachers and all state employees. And I would think you as board members or the organizations would want to say, that makes no sense. We lose our voice as school folks on what's important to school folks, and it just gets dumped into the state. So those kinds of issues. But again, that's not a John, Bobby, Joe, Mark. That's a different issue.
Thank you. Bobby Joe?
Thanks. So, the terms cost effective and affordable are subjective in this group, as far as what people feel like is affordable and what is cost effective. I know what we've heard from both board members and from the commission is that we're outside of the bargaining process. So we're outside of the premium, we're outside of the cost sharing. So the things that I feel like VEHI can handle or VEHI can make a difference are things like if we wanted to do something with our networks, formularies, and that's, the drugs that we cover on our formularies and plan design. I mean, I feel like that's what the VEHI board is able to do to make an impact on cost and bring the cost down. And then it's up to the commission to make decisions on how those costs are split. So if we want to make, I feel like, a meaningful difference, we can change our plan designs, reduce them down to 2, come up with some different ideas of plan designs. And then the commission can do what they do. But I do think there is a distinct difference between the plans that VEHI comes up with and then the benefits that the commission then allows. So.
Thank you.
So is it more appropriate that positions with regard to the health plan should be handled by the organizations that we're representing on this board? So it's that VSBA should be taking on that lobbying and position on proposed legislation, and Vermont NEA should, because they have, they're representing their members in terms of positions and impact on things that are proposed. We're appointed by them to deal with the things that are laid out in our mission. So I hadn't really, thinking about that more, is it for us to really take positions? I think it's more, is it more appropriate that that's left to VSBA and Vermont NEA to respond to those things, because they're representing their members. It's like I don't think we really represent members. I mean, we're a board making decisions about these plans, and how they're designed and accessed and those types of things. So I guess I'm thinking about that a little bit more as a result of this conversation.
Thank you, Cheryl. And you bring up a interesting point. You know, when we took on the role of board members, we prioritized our representing our members. So that's the members of VEHI, right? So I think it was somewhere in the duties of a nonprofit board or somewhere in there where it said like, hey, we talked about allegiances, but when you're on a board and you're acting as a board member, you're representing your members, right? So our members are the school boards, the school districts, and the staff that are employed by them. So I think, in my mind, Cheryl, we're not representing the VSBA on this board. We're representing the school districts on this board, and our colleagues are representing the staff, not the NEA. It's a small distinction, but
Okay.
yeah, Lisa?
Yeah, to that point, it seems to me that VEHI isn't just responsible or in terms of the existing plans. My understanding was, I think I heard you say something about unbiased information about cost and plans. So if costs overall can be addressed, that would be within our purview. I'm not sure, but it would strike me that that would be the case. Like
Mark?
overall.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my comment's going to build off of Lisa's. One can endorse legislation in this context as an organization, VI, not to speak for school employees or school board members, but to endorse actions, policies that will make it easier for us to offer cost-effective and affordable plans. So, for example, we endorsed PDAB last year, the VEHI board did, which I think was a watershed moment for us, frankly, because we know the two major drivers of our premiums are hospital costs and RX costs. So to the extent we pass policies in this state or laws or set regulations that control those costs or lower them, again, PDAB and reference-based pricing being the two most immediate examples, it is much easier for us to offer plans at premium rates that are more affordable and cost effective. So we can think about endorsement not as speaking for school districts or speaking for school employees, but speaking to actions, policies that allow pools like ours to function more effectively and to offer the kind of value our mission statement requires us to offer. And finally, I'd say that it makes a difference to policymakers in the legislature when organizations like this, and our decisions impact every taxpayer in Vermont. That's the other thing. I mean, it's not just school districts and school employees. We impact every taxpayer. So for legislators to hear from this organization that, again, I'll go back to PDAB, a prescription drug affordability board will be good for Vermont and will be good for taxpayers and school districts because of the following. Again, we don't speak there for school boards or school employees, but we're saying we serve those folks. We can do a better job and keep costs down if this kind of legislation is in place.
Thank you. All right, I do want to pivot to actual legislation that's on the docket. Lance, go ahead.
So just in thinking about this and in looking in the the past couple of years, some of the things that VEHI has done, to support, like supporting S98 last year. If our goal is to provide quality, affordable health care, why wouldn't we support efforts to achieve that? That's kind of that's sort of how I frame this, how I think about this. If somebody's doing something, if the legislature is doing something or thinking about doing something that's going to lower the cost of health care and still provide the same quality health care, isn't that what our mission tells us that we're supposed to support? Because it seems as though that is what we're supposed to be doing. Now, the question becomes then, what do we do to support that? You know, do we make a statement that supports that? Do we say, we support this legislation because this legislation speaks to our mission statement? Or is there some other way that we can support it? You know, support legislation that does that. But quite frankly, it seems like a no-brainer to me that we would be supporting legislation that would achieve what our mission statement tells us that we're supposed to be trying to achieve.
Mark?
Mike, it just occurred to me as Lance was talking, we've been focusing on the potential of endorsing legislation that has a really positive impact on our operations and our price setting. While we have testified most commonly to provide information to the legislature, we have also testified in opposition to legislation or pieces of legislation that would make it more difficult for us to fulfill our mission. So last year, both Bobby Joe and I testified against provisions in a prescription drug bill, that would have dramatically raised costs for our RX program. The details aren't important, but when we looked at the legislation, we thought, oh my gosh, if we like parts of the bill, but not this part. So we went to the legislature and we said, this really can't stand. In fact, there were two particular issues that year that were really problematic for us in the RX front. So we testified against that because it would have raised costs for us. So while our endorsement of specific legislation has been very limited in the past, we have testified against legislation that would have, again, made it more difficult for us to fulfill our mission.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna close with one thought, and then we'll pivot to actual legislation for consideration. Lance and I were talking this weekend, and one of the things I said is I reflected on when I got on the board and Lisa was on the board, it was a very contentious board. And we worked hard as a group to become more collaborative and higher functioning. And we're starting to delve into the business of VEHI in a way that I didn't see 2.5 years ago. And there's work for us to do. I keep saying the levers that we can pull, right? The benefit design and plan design and all that kind of stuff that we talked about, especially at our last meeting. And I truly believe that that is our mission as a board, is to work on that work. Advocating on behalf or against some legislation, yes, absolutely, can impact the services and the costs that we're responsible for. But I think it's really important that this board spend our time and our energy on managing and governing VEHI. And I want to avoid us becoming dysfunctional over politics, because we have a mission as a board to VEHI. So I think if there is something like the PDAB, right, which we all said, yes, it's clear that that's going to have a benefit to our members, to the, that, and we can agree on that, I'm gonna support that. I'm gonna be very cautious if we get into legislation that's not super clear that there's a benefit or that we're all, because I really want to avoid this board fracturing and losing the momentum we had to being a highly functional board. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox and we will pivot. And I don't know, does the management team have certain legislation that they want to bring to bear? I haven't really, apologize, I haven't really coordinated with the management team. Or does any board member have any specific legislation that they want to bring up for the board to consider?
I mean, I can speak to what I think is happening at the legislature at present,
Okay.
and then provide the board with some more detail because on a day-to-day basis, the chess pieces are always moving, and I'm not at the legislature very often, blessedly so. And so I think there's two major initiatives sort of at the 35,000 foot level. One is the conversation about reference-based pricing for hospitals has completely taken on a life of its own in a way I think that even surprised me. And I've been a pretty passionate supporter of it. There's been really good testimony at the House Healthcare Committee in recent weeks. Last week, Marilyn Bartlett and Margaret Issa Smith from Oregon both testified in favor of it, and their testimony was very comprehensive and well received. I testified on behalf of Vermont NEA in support of reference-based pricing. So I think, and in fact, Dave Merman of the Green Mountain Care Board had some really positive things to say about it as well when he testified in the Senate last week. So I think something is going to emerge around reference-based pricing this legislative session. It may be in the budget, it may be a standalone bill or both. Both chambers may move a little differently and then try to resolve their differences in conference. But I think we're going to see emerge some direction around reference-based pricing. I think also there is actually a bill that has been submitted in support of reference-based pricing, a standalone bill. I'll see if I'm correct about that and then let the board know. The other big policy direction, which I also think is very good for us, is strengthening the Green Mountain Care Board's capacity to audit hospital budgets. We know the University of Vermont Medical Center now has violated its budget order for 2 consecutive years, which has a direct impact on us and every other risk pool. And there's also efforts underway to expand the staff and resources of the Green Mountain Care Board to begin doing some population health planning that'll address the total costs of the healthcare system, which also has an impact on us and every other pool. There is a bill in the House and the Senate to address those concerns. I don't know their status at present, but I can find out where they stand. Again, get information to the board, and we can decide if, like PDAB, that legislation deserves our endorsement. There's also a bill, I believe, that emanated from the state treasurer's office to address medical debt in Vermont, and to find a way to pay down that medical debt for about 62,000 Vermonters who are carrying it. So again, I don't know the status of that legislation, but it's something I can find out. But that's what I know off the top of my head this morning.
I'm looking at S43, which is, let's see, I'm trying to read on my little screen here. The bill would allow state employee implement reference-based pricing for state employees' health plan for inpatient and outpatient services, et cetera. But there's a little sentence in there that also says would also allow school employees to join the plan.
Is that Jeanette White's bill, Jonathan?
I'm just reading it right here. It is Senator White. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I heard
So
she
it
was
would
going to
allow-
submit something.
Yep. So it would allow school employees. So it must be. Now I'm going to have to dig into a little bit more. So
Where
I'll get it out to you.
someone mentioned that the proposal to roll, this is off the backside of the roll, is that the proposal to roll school employees in with the state employees? Is that the same thread or is that different?
I thought that came from the chamber, didn't it, Mark?
The chamber proposed it, I think, in an open letter or
Okay. Yep.
editorial. Mark Koenig raised it on behalf of the VSBA commissioners I think early on in conversations between the parties. And did they raise, I think they may have raised that with us as well. Conceptually, the first time they met with us, Mark and Mike, and the commissioners.
Yeah, so it says, for purposes of group hospital surgical medical expense insurance only, the term employees may include school employees at the option of a school employer as those as defined in 16 VSA 2101. So
Wait, so that
isn't this
that
bill?
last phrase said to me that bill says a district can choose.
Yep, to
Yeah.
leave VEHI and go into this plan.
You know,
So-
at present, our private schools can choose to leave and return under the conditions that we've established. Public schools do not have that right at present.
Public schools are mandated by
Correct.
statute to be
That's
part
right.
of VEHI.
That's
Okay.
true.
Yep,
At
there's
present.
there's not been a hearing on 43.
Is that actually in the statute or is that based on the statewide bargaining agreement?
But statewide bargaining is in statute. Mhm.
So it,
So that's S43, right? That's
Yep. Yes,
that's also reference-based pricing, right? So
yes.
it's just okay. So let's take this as a good example, right? So we generally support moving forward with reference-based pricing. I think we've all, agreed on that, and yet there's that clause in there that we're uncomfortable with. So we've never employed a lobbyist, have we? We have? Oh,
There was no, excuse me. VEHI has never employed a lobbyist. I think that was
yeah.
the question.
Yeah, that was my question.
Yeah. I don't actually think VEHI can employ a lobbyist because of how our funding streams work. Because we actually don't have any employees. We have two different organizations. VISBIC has employed lobbyists. Vermont NEA has employed lobbyists. I don't know if VEHI is actually structurally capable of doing that.
So I guess that was just sorry, that was an aside. So my question is, if S43 has a lot that we like and a clause that we don't like, how do we go about making and let's say we have a discussion here and we agree that we want to
I mean,
make our thoughts known about that aspect of S43. I guess it's putting the cart before the horse. So, I mean, I guess the first action for the board or deliberation for the board is, do we want to take some action? Do we want to make a position around that part of S43?
I think your question's analogous to my example of how Bobby, Joe, and I handled the prescription legislation last year, parts of which we supported or didn't have a problem with, and other parts that were problematic because they would directly impact our operations and our costs. This technically falls within that, or theoretically falls within that same example. I think one of the differences, or another factor to consider, is, does a bill actually have legs, right? There's an awful lot of bills that go on the wall and they never come down. And the benefit of having lobbyists, like my colleague over on the other side of this wall, is that they have a pretty good sense of what is likely to get traction and what isn't in the legislature. I have no idea if S43 is going anywhere. If we assume that it is, your question then, Mike, is really pertinent. Last year, there was a real possibility that prescription bill was going to move. And we were able to shape it to our advantage without damaging the parts that we thought benefited Vermonters as a whole.
Well, is it at times more appropriate for us to discuss what our position might be? And I understand, the question about employing lobbyists and having lobbyists. I mean, VSBA and Vermont NEA do. So is it that we would say to them, this is how we feel as a board about this piece of legislation. Now, this is, and this is what our position would be with regard to that. And then they take that on in terms of what they're doing. Because we've agreed this is our position, so their position on it would be the same and would be ours. Is that how we handle those types of things?
Suzanne?
So I want to ask a question about what's the fine line distinction between lobbying and making your position known? For example, I don't think we need to have a lobbyist, a paid person that goes to the State House to try to influence votes from different members of the House and Senate. However, I think we can say, I like some of what Cheryl said as well. We can say to Vermont NEA and VSEA that these are VSBA, excuse me, these are the positions that this board has taken. But we also could communicate those positions to the legislature, I'm assuming, without violating any rules around whether or not we have anybody who's paid to do that.
Lisa?
It would seem to me that there's a bit of a chance for the lines of communication to get a little more befuddled if we address the Vermont NEA and the VSBA separately. Because again, if we go back, the only people who are supposed to be communicating this information is the chairman and the vice chairman. And it just seems to me that if there's something that we believe as a board, instead of addressing the separate entities, let's go to the real power source here, which happens to be the legislature. Just a thought.
If our legislative testimony focused, as I alluded to earlier, is focused mostly on what improves our operations and makes it possible for us to control costs or lower costs, and again, provide real value to school districts and school employees, affordable comprehensive care. That's the fundamental focus of VEHI's testimony in any piece of legislation. Then, to Lisa's point, I don't think we need to go to Vermont NEA or VSBA to carry that water. We can certainly speak to that on our own, as we've done in the past. It doesn't mean there aren't occasions where perhaps it would make sense to go to both parties and ask them to speak, to add more weight to our testimony. But the prospect also arises is that one or both of the parent organizations here might disagree with our position. Okay? In which case that puts us in a bind if we think it's really important to VEHI's operations that we take a position. I'm not sure S43 directly impacts our operations given how it's currently framed, but I could be wrong about that. And again, I don't know if it has any real legs at the moment.
Thanks, Mark. Lance?
Yeah, in regards to the, to going to Vermont NEA or VSBA, I would worry also that what we're essentially doing is asking them to speak on our behalf. And that would also open things up to interpretation. Vermont NEA could kind of interpret what we're telling them, and then it would come out through their filter. Same thing with VSBA. So I would worry about that. That piece. And as far as legislation, we talk about specific pieces of legislation. It seems to me that we do like certain parts of specific pieces of legislation because we think that that's going to lower costs. It's going to meet our mission statement. But I also, when we talk about supporting a specific piece of legislation, it changes over time. And I feel like, how would we react to a piece of legislation that we've come out in support of if it changes so that we no longer support part of it? I don't know that this board is nimble enough to, come back out and say, well, we do support this piece of legislation, but this new part of it that got thrown in there, we don't support that. So I think that we would do well to stick more to things that we think are going to provide, affordable quality health care for our members at a price that is going to make it palatable for the healthcare users and also the school boards, the taxpayers.
I think that's a great point, Lance. And I will say, like, we tried to set up this meeting, right, for, I don't know, I think it was early February. And look, it's, late February. So I agree with you. This board has not been nimble. And we do need to be aware that things do change in the legislature as they get down to end of session. That stuff moves really quickly. And I'll share with you, I was part of a coalition that was addressing the pupil weighting. This was what, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that. And we hired a lobbyist, and she was like, you guys need to do in the next 3 hours, you need to call this person, right? Like, that's how quick that stuff happened. Yeah. Bobby Joe?
So I agree with Lance as far as the changes piece, and that's something that always worries me is, yeah, we endorse this, and then all of a sudden it shifts to something else. So I think that's a great point. Thank you for raising it. When it comes to something like reference-based pricing, the devil's in the details, right? And that's what I worry about, is that there are different versions of reference-based pricing. Are we all in favor of lower hospital costs? 100%, of course we are. What I worry about with something like reference-based pricing is all of a sudden it gets this twist to it, that it's the version where people have to fight with their providers to not be balance billed, because there is a version of that, of reference-based pricing, that's out there that talks about, all right, this is what VEHI is going to pay for this procedure, and then you're gonna have to figure it out, like fight with your provider, or the pools have to hire this stable of lawyers, they refer to it, to go after. So I do worry that by blanketly saying we support reference-based pricing, that it needs to be really clear, because this S43 that I'm looking at is just like a blanket statement that we support that. So that's the kind of thing that I worry about, is it goes in one way, but it comes back out another.
So we've got like 9 minutes left. And so far, we don't have any proposals on the table, no motions on the table. I do want to, Andrew, I'm not calling you out, but I just want to make sure that we give you space to weigh in here, because you're the only board member who hasn't weighed in here. So if there's anything that you want to say, and if there's not, that's fine.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Mike. And there was a moment I was going to jump in, but most people have said kind of where I feel. And I to be honest with you, I'm skeptical. I agree with people about us jumping into the arena. I think we can offer stuff, but taking positions worries me a little bit. So that's kind of where I sit.
Okay, thank you. So I haven't heard yet any proposals for, I mean, this is good that we're getting information and we know what's going on, but I haven't heard any proposals for any positions yet. Okay. Is there anything that board members, other than, like, I think as a board member, I just want to be kept informed about what's going on, right? Which bills are floating, which bills are floating to the surface, which ones are moving out of committee, which ones really have legs, as Mark, you said. So I think staying in touch with what's the discussions that are going on in Montpelier is really important, as well as the ones that are happening in, the public positions that are being taken, like that Mike Smith letter or the Chambers letter, I think is really important for us as the session progresses. But what I'm seeing is that the board is not considering any action today. Mark?
I think that makes sense. And I think the reference-based pricing conversation is going to come to a head in March with the budget, perhaps later if there's a standalone bill. Bobby Joe is right. Devils are always in details. The RBP initiative that Vermont NEA and VSEA are pursuing would strictly ban balance billing, as they did in Montana and Oregon and other states. It's a very important issue, and we have been very sensitive to it. But there are still not enough details, to your point, Mike, for this board to take a position on a specific piece of legislation. The board can speak, if it wishes, generally to the importance of controlling hospital costs and the promise of reference-based pricing, if it chooses to do so. If not, then we wait to see where the legislation lands and then revisit it with, I think, the understanding that we may need to come together at a special meeting again, depending on timeline. If there's a long gap between the legislation dropping and the next board meeting, it may be important to come together to take a position or not. Finally, I'll just say on the issue of nimbleness, and Suzanne raised the question of existential threats or existential issues. The insurance carrier in Vermont that has 70% of the market, Blue Cross, is in very deep fiscal trouble. And so is its parent company, we've recently learned, Blues Michigan. The entire commercial insurance market in this state is on thin ice in some respects. And the question of how to provide benefits to the public sector, whether it's in pools like this or larger pools like Oregon is doing, I think that conversation is inevitable. And I think this board and other risk pools in the public sector are going to be grappling with it. So we may need to consider in the future how we interact with the legislature in a more nimble and expeditious fashion. And what are the best ways to do that? Because we're in an entirely different insurance market than we were 30 years ago, even 20 years ago. And I think it compels us to think really differently about all of our operations, our plans, and also how we interact with the legislature. I think the word existential here is actually a really good way to describe what a lot of us, not just VEHI, are facing.
Thank you, Mark. So, and to that point, if we do need to come together before a scheduled board meeting, I'm going to ask Bobby Joe to do her doodle magic. And if we can't find something, instead of extending the time, like, hey, we're going to look farther out, I'm going to ask her to just go again. And so we'll all take another look at our calendars. Is there something that we can move? Is there a way that we can make ourselves available? Because I have a feeling that the next time we meet, we're going to have to be a little more prompt or nimble.
So before anyone in the management team gives testimony, are we aware of, as a board, that you are giving testimony and what the nature of the testimony is?
Well, it depends, I think. Bobby Joe alluded earlier to it's not uncommon for us to get a 24-hour notice that a particular committee wants to see us. That happened twice, actually, just before I left for California. So actually, no, it happened once to us and once to me as a Vermont NEA advocate. Again, legislative time is really different from normal Homo sapien time. And in a heartbeat, you can be asked to testify and you have nothing prepared. So historically, because our testimony has been just focused on operations and plans and costs, we haven't alerted the board in advance. There have been occasions when we've told the board post-testimony what we've done. If there's enough lead time, we can certainly let the board know that we're going to be testifying at the request of the legislature, if that's what you would like. And we can always let you know afterwards what we've done and share our testimony too. That protocol is easily adopted.
So let me ask this question. When you're asked to testify, is the answer almost always yes? If you physically can?
Yes. I mean, because again, what the legislature historically has wanted is information. I mean,
Okay.
both John and Bobby Joe have touched on this. I mean, it's a little strange to say this, but it's perhaps not surprising either, that even though we've been around for 30 years, there's still a lot of legislators, both veteran and new, who really don't understand how we work, don't understand our structure,
It's clear.
Yeah.
don't even know what VEHI is. They still think, oh, school employees have Blue Cross coverage, for example. Or they just talk about teachers as though we only serve teachers and not administrators and support staff and their
Yeah.
families and
So
retirees.
so here's my ask. When you get asked to testify, you let the board know. And even if it's 24-hour notice,
Yeah.
just keep us in the loop.
Happy to do that.
Okay.
And it's always both of you that are testifying?
Historically, it's been both of us. On
Mhm.
occasion, one of us couldn't make it, but we always approve our testimony together. So if
Okay.
we're asked to testify as VI management team, we agree on the testimony before we go in. So in the event one of us can't make it, let's say one of us falls ill or we're jammed up with a work commitment, we know that the testimony that's being given is consistent with the management team's position.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, for this really good. Oh, Lance, you got a final thought?
Yeah, I do. Sorry about that. Yeah, I just want to go back to when I think when I think about this, it's like I've been trying to think of a way that we could make sort of a blanket statement that we support legislation that would meet our stated mission to make available benefit plans that are cost effective and affordable, right? But no matter every angle I kind of come at it, because I've been doing this during this meeting, I've been trying to think of a way to to kind of do that where you're sort of giving like a blanket, we support any legislation that's going to help us achieve this, right? But no matter what I do, it's always this namby-pamby thing, that just is there's no power behind it. But I just want to think about this some more. I'd like for all of us to think about how can we show that we support legislation that's going to help achieve our mission statement. Because I think that that's important. Mike, you brought up the mission statement. You threw it out there, and I've thought about that a great deal since you did that. Over the last couple days, and so I just wonder if we all thought about that, about how we could convey that we do support legislation that's going to help us achieve that without going after specific pieces of legislation that might change.
That's a good thought. Yeah, thank you.
I do think it's important when we are giving testimony that it is both Mark and Bobby Joe giving testimony. So that it's clear it is VEHI. And I think that helps to ensure that when Bobby Joe are there together representing VEHI. I know, there may be other roles that some have that, I just want to be clear when we're there and it's VEHI, and I think when it's Mark and Bobby Joe together, it reinforces that to be clear that is VEHI.
I think it's a great point, Cheryl, because both Mark and Bobby Joe wear multiple hats, right? They're
Mhm.
both not employees of VEHI, sole employees of VEHI, and not sole service providers to VEHI, right? So thank you for that. Chris?
Hi, make this quick. I know you're trying to finish up. The only thing is when Lance, when you were speaking about like some sort of blanket comment, the only thing I would say is that we do have to be cognizant of both at the board level and sometimes at even the management level. We might not always all agree on the same position as to what will advance healthcare reform. So I think that just needs to be said. I think everybody's trying to work as collaboratively as possible, but sometimes there are opinions that come in and we don't always have the same opinions. So that can be a challenge, I think, historically, for testimony when, you know, when the board leaves it up to the management team, and then the management team may or may not have the same exact position. So where does that land? You know, even if Bobby Joe and Mark are both there, they may have slightly different positions. So how does that work, and how does that come together? And I think if it were me sitting in that chair, you know, I'd be looking to the VEHI board as the governing entity to help steer that when the management team is struggling with that. And I'm not saying that it's a big struggle. I'm not saying this happens a lot. I don't want to, overdo that, but it is just something to be aware of, and it's not Bobby, Joe, and Mark. It's the positions, and, people change, dynamics change, people in those chairs change. So, you need to set procedures and policies that help address positions, not necessarily the two people in the chair now that can get along. So.
Okay. Thank you, Chris.
Sure.
All right. Any final comments? I know we're a couple minutes over. Thanks, everybody, for the good discussion today. We will speak again on the 28th, March 14th, 20, what is
I
it?
think it's the 18th, if I.
18th. Yes, that sounds
Keep
right.
throwing out numbers, eventually we'll get it.
All right, everybody. Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much. Oh,
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry. I need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion, I have to Cheryl, seconded by Lisa. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting is adjourned at 10:05. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.